retired United States Navy, joins me. I want him to cut a video with the Washington Speakers Bureau just jauntily moving about to that music because I think it's perfect for you, Admiral. Good morning, Admiral.
I love it that I have theme music.
You do. You have a theme
my
song,
day.
Beyond the Sea. Admiral, just a straight-up, open-ended question. Your assessment of the State of the Union speech.
I think any American, whether you are on the left or the right, ought to be concerned about the president's refusal to shake the speaker's hand and the speaker ripping up the speech. I think both of those tell us that the State of the Union, in a word, is divided, and we ought to be concerned about that. But let's focus on the international side, which is kind of what I do, not the domestic politics. I was very happy to see, probably not hugely noticed amidst all the other folks on display there, very happy to see Juan Guaido, the actual president, if you will, of Venezuela there, getting a shout out from the president. I thought that was good. I thought the president on the international side touted the accomplishments, which are reasonably good. We've got the beginning of a trade deal with China. We've got a significant ongoing fight, but relatively successful one over the Islamic State. North Korea has not let off a nuclear weapon or tested a big ballistic missile. So the president has some accomplishments on that side. It's fair that he states them. And lastly, because it's kind of my wheelhouse, I'll just mention NATO. It's a good thing that the allies are paying more. We've still got some distance to go there, but I think there's some effect. So on the international side, he laid out, I think, a reasonable case for accomplishments. The domestic side, I think all Americans ought to be concerned about how divided we are.
I want to comment on a few things that were specifically military and elicit response. General McGee being there gave me a chill, as did the mother and son who have lost a husband and dad in Iraq to Soleimani's roadside bomb, as did the reunification of the family. But before that, a heartfelt shout out to military families everywhere. These were high points for me.
Yes. Completely agree. And the president has been extremely supportive of the military. And it's not only financial. I think it is, in fact, something that touches him. And so I think all of those moments were legitimate, and I was happy to see every one of them.
Now I want to switch to coronavirus, Admiral. Because I don't want to put you in the position, I don't like to put the military in the position of getting into partisan politics. I am very upset with the speaker, but I'll leave that for other segments. As of this morning, South China Morning Post, good paper, 24,561 official cases. I believe the number is higher. 492 deaths, 911 recoveries. That tells me high morbidity, low mortality, no containment, but some promising antiviral combination treatments. What say you?
Roughly the same. And again, let's compare this with 100 years ago to Spanish influenza. Spanish influenza infected 40% of the global population with a 20% mortality rate. The observed mortality rate, what we're getting out of China, looks like it's running around 2%. So compared to Spanish influenza, much, much lower. And that makes sense because our palliative, our treatment regimes are much, much better. And we have more resources to put at the problem. At the same time, Hugh, we have to be very concerned about, first, the veracity of the numbers coming out of China. There have been many studies that believe China is understating it significantly. And secondly, it continues to move. It's continuing to pop in other places. We also saw today the second death outside of China. It's in Hong Kong, nominally part of China, of course. But that shows us this thing is still on the upswing in terms of infections. Let's hope we can hold morbidity, as you point out, down at that 2% or lower range. And let's see where this thing goes. I'll close by saying that let's compare that mortality rate to, if you will, garden variety annual flu season in the United States. The mortality rate of that is only about 0.1%. So this thing at 2% is actually quite high, although not as high, obviously, as Spanish influenza. So it's still a flashing yellow light, but compared to where we were a week ago when you and I talked about it, I'm cautiously optimistic we're going to be able to hold this thing in China and deal with it in a reasonable way internationally. Fingers crossed.
Now, the R-OT factor, which is the number of patients infected by everyone who has it, is very difficult to tell because of the unreliability of the data. I note also from the South China Morning Post, asymptomatic transmitters. Chinese health authorities have identified a number of patients who have become carriers and transmitters of the coronavirus despite showing no outward symptom of the disease. They also report this morning a newborn testing positive. Both developments are bad.
Indeed, and particularly the first one. Newborn, okay, part of the mother's biosystem. I'm gonna say that is not as surprising or concerning as the first fact, which is the idea that people can show no symptoms despite the fact that they are, I think the medical term is shedding the virus. And the problem with that, of course, is almost all of our ability to quarantine is based on measuring people. Do they have a fever? Are they coughing? Is their nose running? That's those screenings you see on CNN as people are getting off of aircraft. Well, if there are no signs, no visible signs, and you are shedding that virus, that means that line of defense is immediately breached. And that explains, I think, why even though the Chinese, in a very draconian way, appropriately, have locked down 50 million people in the center of the country around Wuhan, but it's still expanding the numbers, and it's because they can't tell who has it or not. It means that to stop this thing, you're going to have to just freeze travel completely. That's why I applaud the airlines who are saying, look, we're just not going to fly in and out of China right now.
For 2 weeks, they have to, for 2 weeks. Now, I want to read to you, switch again, Admiral, last subject, from Foreign Policy about 20 hours ago. The U.S. Department of Defense plans to propose retiring hundreds of the Air Force's aging fighter jets and bomber aircraft over the next 5 years to shift towards building new capabilities to counter China and Russia. That comes from Lori Siegelman, who's a very good reporter. What do you make? I get retiring old fighters. I don't get retiring strategic bombers if that's in fact what they've got in mind, because those can become missile platforms.
That's exactly right. And the B-52 force, which was part of the original triad, back when we had the original triad had the missile silos and the ballistic submarines, and the third leg of that triad were these B-52s. They have made the turn with air-launched cruise missiles, which are highly effective. And so you don't need to have a super sophisticated fifth-generation bomber the way you need a fifth-generation fighter in order to have real effect in the fight. Having said that, certainly on the fighter side, if we're going to compete, and we have to, with opponents like China and Russia, real peer or near-peer competitors, the Air Force is going to have to up its fighter game for that close-in fight. On the strategic bomber side, as you say, there's two speeds here. You need that advanced, stealthy B-2, B-21 bomber, and I do some consulting with Northrop Grumman, so I've had a good look at that advanced plan. Those make sense. On the other hand, those old buses, if you will, like those B-52s, can carry those Tomahawk cruise missiles, for example. Up the game on those cruise missiles, make them more stealthy, keep those old buses, they'll fly 100 years.
Now, to close that and put a knot on it, civilians are now hearing the word hypersonic. I only dimly understand what that means, but I'm getting there. Can B-52s elude hypersonics?
They would not have to. Hypersonics, at this stage, hypersonics are directed against land targets, or they could be directed against ships. But at the moment, it is improbable that a true hypersonic, which simply means hyper is very fast, sonic, it refers to how many times the speed of sound does the missile go. Hence, hypersonic is moving at 10 times the speed of sound, as opposed to more conventional missiles are 1 to 2 times the speed of sound. So it's essentially a tenfold increase in speed. Right now, those lumbering air platforms really would not be an appropriate target. So to your point, those buses can still carry hypersonic missiles. That's where I thought you were going. Put those hypersonic, make them air-launched on those lumbering buses. That's a pretty lethal combination going against land targets.
Great, as always, Admiral James Stavridis. Thank you. Follow him at Stavridis J on Twitter. Follow him here every week. The audio will be posted, of course. Thank you, Admiral.